right? So from today, we are going to start framework development and framework design and development. So first of all, let us see what is framework and why we need a framework. And then we will see how we can create folder structure. And also we will see step-by-step implementation of REST assured framework. So first of all, what is framework? So every automation tool or every automation required a framework. So what is framework means? For example, when you're trying to automate any test cases, so we will have so many types of files in our automation. So what kind of files we have to maintain? So like we have different URLs we have to maintain, especially REST assured automation I'm talking about. So we have to maintain different type of URLs and endpoints. And sometimes we also have POJOs, like every model is having some kind of a POJO classes and test cases, data-driven test cases, right? So, and reports. So many things we have in our automation. So we need to maintain all of them properly. And the main objective of designing the framework is what? Reusability. So suppose sometimes we design something, some class or some reusable component, or whenever you design some component that should be reusable. Multiple times we should able to execute, or multiple times we should able to use it. And that is reusability. And then other thing is maintainability. Suppose today you have completed or you have designed some framework, and tomorrow somebody else is using the same framework, or somebody else is adding some more test cases, or is trying to modify existing test cases, then you should able to do it. That's called maintainability and readability. So once you have designed your framework, anybody can easily read and understand your code or understand your framework. So that's called readability. So the main objective of designing the framework is what? Reusability, maintainability, and then readability. So these are the main things which we have to follow. So first of all, what is framework? Framework is nothing but maintain all project related files. And main objective is, the main objectives of framework is mainly three objectives. One is reusability, because once you created something, we should be able to reuse it. And then maintainability, and then readability. So these are the main objectives of creating the framework. So again, there are different type of frameworks are there. So we are mainly going to focus on hybrid driven. So hybrid driven is nothing but which is a combination of data driven and modular, or we can say combination of data driven and keyword driven. So any combination of any other two frameworks, we call them as a hybrid driven framework. So we'll see how we can develop or how we can design and develop the framework, and which is having different phases actually. So we don't directly jump into the development of framework. So we need to go to certain process. So the day one itself, we don't directly jump into the designing or development of framework. So what are the different phases which we have to go through? Phases in phases of designing and development of automation framework. The first phase is we need to first understand the clear requirement. That's the most important. Understanding requirement. So irrespective what kind of URLs we have, what kind of request we need, and what kind of response we have to get when you're sending your request. So all these things we need to first understand thoroughly. So to understand this requirement, we have something called functional specifications. And also we need to take the help of Swagger, because at the initial level, you won't have a Swagger tool. Okay, but you will have some static documentation. Like we have functional specification is more static documentation. And based on that, to start preparing your test cases. But once you get a Swagger from the developer, then you will know very clearly what kind of request, in which format you have to send, what kind of response you will get. So all these things will be more clear in the Swagger documentation. So these are the two important things you need to have before starting the framework. Okay, so functional specifications and then Swagger document you have to use for reference. So this is the first thing. The second thing is what? Once you understand your requirement, the second thing is what? You will choose automation tool, right? Suppose if you are using REST assured APIs, obviously we'll choose REST assured automation. REST assured is it's not exactly as a tool. Okay, many people will say REST assured is a tool, Selenium is a tool. They are not tools actually. They are libraries, or we can third-party libraries. Even Selenium is also like REST assured also. They are all libraries. They are not exactly a single tool. Tool is nothing but what? Suppose we download and install and use it. That's a different tool. But here, even if you go for Selenium or if you're using REST assured, these are not exactly tools actually. So they are the libraries. Means what? Which contains a number of jar files. And there contains this at a number of classes or methods, and they're bundled together. And what we are doing is we are just downloading them and use it in your automation. So they are basically a library. Okay, or people will call it as a tool also, but that's not the right term to use. So normally we use this term, automation tool. So we need to choose right tool to automate your test cases. Okay, and here we are using REST assured. REST assured, we can say library. This is REST assured, or I say library. Okay. And next, third thing is, once you understand the requirement and once you choose the right automation tool, then we will design first we need to design it. Design your framework. Like in the design part, what we will be covered. So what kind of folder structure should be there? What kind of files we have to create? How we can manage? So all these things we have to design first. And then we have to develop it. Design, then development. And whatever files we have decided to design. So once you design, we have to develop or we have to implement those files. And finally, we have execution and part of CI, execution plus continuous integration. So these are the different phases which we have to go through while designing your framework. So first we need to understand the requirement with respect to requirements and Swagger document, and then we choose a tool or library which we are going to use for automation, then designing, development, and then execution will follow. So this is the how we need to do it. So choosing the tool, right tool, it depends on many factors, right? Suppose based on the budgets, based on the team skills, there are many factors are involved, and then they'll do some kind of analysis based on the tools which are available in the market. So they will compare the tools which is especially suitable for your requirement. Because if we are going for web automation tool, there are multiple options are there. But if you are going API testing, right? So API testing can be done by using any tool. With less number of tools are there, but you can use any of the tool. But most of them are open source tools are available in the market. Okay, so we will also consider the budget and skill set of the team and technology they have used to design the APIs. So all these things we have to consider, and accordingly we choose the tool. So these are the different phases which you have to go through. So now, first of all, we need to have function spec and Swagger and so on. So based on that, we will prepare some test cases. Okay, we'll prepare some test cases. So let me show you. In the last class, I have told you we are going to automate pet store. So if I just go to the pet store API, this is the Swagger document which is available. So in the pet store, Swagger pet store, we have a different models are available. You can just look at down here. There are multiple models are there. API response, category, pet, tag, order, and user. These are different models. Okay, and for these models, different type of APIs are designed. And if I just go up, and you can consider them as a different modules of one application. Okay, so here you can say pet is one module we can consider, and store is another module, user is another module. So there are three different modules we have: pet, store, and user. So for these three modules, we have to first create a test cases. Okay, here we don't have a functional spec, but in the real environment, you will get a functional spec also, some static document you will get, which will give you very brief idea about the models and the kind of request and so on. But once you get a Swagger, you will have a more clarity on this. because you need some URL, right? So those URLs you will get only once the APIs got developed. But initially you don't have URLs, but you will have some feature like what type of request, what type of it is a get request or post what kind of request you want to send, what kind of data you want to send, and what kind of response you will get. So very high level information is available in the static documentation. But once the Swagger is available, then you will get a URLs also along with the URL endpoints, everything you will get. So once you have this, for this, we have to create a test cases. That's the first thing. So for each and every type of request, so what kind of inputs we required and what kind of URL we have to use. So all these things we will able to get from the Swagger document. So first of all, let me take one module. I'm taking user module, and I will show you some of the tests, how we can automate by using framework from the scratch. And once you understand how to design and develop the framework, and then you can continue automating the rest of the test cases. So initially I'm taking a user module, and later you can also automate store and pet. So these two module also you can have it. Okay. Yes, test cases in the sense I'm talking about manual test cases, not automation, because before going for an automation, you need to have a manual test cases first. Okay. And you need to go through multiple reviews also. And if there is any additional things you do add, so you need to keep adding more number of things. You keep modifying the test cases. So it should go through certain process. Okay. And this is again same as web automation. How the process will be there in web automation, same thing will be there in API also. No, there is no much change here. Okay. So here we'll take one module, user module, and we will try to implement the framework. And once you understand the framework implementation, development, everything, so then you can proceed with the rest of the test cases. And you have to do your own, okay? Because 30%, 30% I will explain most of the things, and rest of them you have to continue on that, okay? So this is the one how we are going to automate. And let me show you how to write a test case. So for the user model, I've taken mainly 4 type of request. Get request, based on the username, we can get the user details. And based on the username, we can update the user, we can delete the user based on the username. And then we can create a user by using a post request. I have taken few requests from here and prepare some test cases. So this is the template which we have to use to prepare your test cases. So here we will specify the test case ID and then model name. And for which model is nothing but a module you can consider. Like we have 3 module, right? User, pet, and store. So we have written some test cases here for user module. And then what kind of test you are doing. So creating user or get user, update user or delete user. So whatever you want, you can just put the title and what type of request you are going to send, post, get, put, whatever. And what kind of URL you have to send. So that URL also you need to specify. And for these 3, get user, update user, delete user, username is an input for us. And that should be the path parameter. And that you can specify as part of request body, because the path parameter also should go along with the request. And if there is any authentication or any query parameters, we can specify them here in this column. And what kind of response you will get once you send a request. And what kind of authentication it supports. If there is an authentication, you specify what kind of authentication, or else you can say not applicable. And what is the status code which we'll get. So like this, for every model or every module, whatever number of requests we have, so we need to write a test case like this. This sample template I have created, and I'll share this template. Accordingly, you can create the test cases for the rest of the request and rest of the modules. Okay, last class I have told you also, so how to, we can just create some test cases. So similar, this is the way we need to write your API test cases in the Excel sheet. Okay. And yeah, so once you have done, so but initially you don't have these URLs, and also request body and response, but you will have some kind of basic functionality, like what kind of module it is, what kind of operations you will do, and what kind of request. So you can fill this sheet, and after that you can update. Once you get a Swagger, then you can update the URLs and response body and response and so on. So you can add multiple columns also. Here status column, after execution you can make it as pass or fail, whatever you want. you can do it. So this is a Excel sheet where we can write all our API test cases, just like a web automation. So API also, we follow the test cases. This is the first thing. So once you write your automation, once you have written your manual test cases, these are the manual test cases. And before jumping into automation, we have to execute them at least once in a Postman tool, because Postman is a manual testing process we do. So at least once execute them in the Postman tool, and then try to automate in the rest assured. Because once you automate it in the rest assured, you can run in any number of times. Okay. So this is the one we need to do, and then design. So now we will see the design part. So how we can design the frameworks and what are the steps which include, what is the workflow in the framework, so that we need to have more clarity on this. So let me share a small document. Okay. So just look at this workflow. So this is Rust Assured framework design workflow. So basically, this is the entire very high level workflow of your framework. So what are the different things or component files we create as part of the framework? So everything will be part of this picture. And let me just go through what exactly it is. So in the entire framework, we divide into 3 different parts. One is development part, the other one is execution part, and then third part is CI, continuous integration. So first we'll focus on the development and then execution. And once the execution is successfully done, then we will push that code into GitHub repositories, and finally we will run through Jenkins. And this is the entire process. So if I just go through each and every component in your framework, first of all, we will maintain the endpoints. And this is one package we will create, and where we will have multiple classes like routes, user endpoints, store endpoints, pet. So whatever modules you have in your project, for each module, there will be some endpoints. So endpoints in the sense URL. So you can just look at here. These are the endpoints. For every module, these endpoints will be different. So in the framework, what you do is we will maintain all endpoints into one single package with the different classes. We don't put everything in one single class. So for user endpoints, store endpoints, pet endpoints, before writing these endpoints, we will have a routes actually. So routes is basically a single class where we will maintain all the URLs related to all the modules, like pet module, user, store, every module URLs we will maintain in the routes class. Then we will create some other classes like user endpoints, store endpoints, pet endpoints, and each and every endpoint class, there is an implementation of that particular request. So basically what you will do is in our REST assured automation test case, let's say, so far we have written some test cases in the REST assured. So we have created the test-ng class, right? We have say a test annotation, okay, in the test case. So what we have included in this, we have included multiple sections, given, when, then, right? Given is nothing but what? Prerequisite. Given is nothing but what? Prerequisite. And then what we have done after prerequisite is as achieved, then we have sent a request. So request type is also part of this. And then response validation. So these are the main 3 things we have included in your test-ng test. So now what you will do is in the test-ng test, we will include only validation part. So we don't include any prerequisite, we don't include any request type. So these things will be part of your endpoints, user endpoints. We will have all implementation of user request. And store endpoints. In this class, we will have implementation of store. And pet endpoints, here we will have implementation of all pet related APIs. But actually in the test case, what we will do, user test, store test, pet, we will create different test case classes. And these classes are include only tests, only validations. So far we have written this approach, prerequisite, request type, everything is a part of your test. But now we are dividing these two into multiple things. So prerequisite, request type. So these two are the part of endpoints, user endpoints, store endpoints, pet endpoint. Every module will create a different type of endpoint classes. And routes is a common class which is required for each endpoint. Routes contains what? Only URLs, nothing. There is no implementation. Only URLs we will maintain in one single file. Right? And these things will be called by test cases. And once you design your test cases, those test cases will be executed by test.ng file. And then we will run through pom.xml. And what are other components they will use here is payloads. Payload is nothing but what? For every model, there will be some payload. For example, I'm trying to automate a user model. That means what? We have to create some user data. Especially while creating the user, we need to post, right? We need to send a post request. For that, we need some data. And the post request, we have to pass some data as part of your request. So the data can be prepared in multiple ways. We can use POJO, we can use JSON, we can use hash map. Earlier we have discussed, right, many ways we can create a request body. So here we use POJO approach most of the times. So we have to maintain the POJO classes also. So for that, we will create one more package called payloads. So payloads, we will maintain all the POJOs like user related POJO, store, pet. For every model, we have one POJO class is required to create a data. And utilities are required. So especially to perform data-driven testing in test.ng, we use something called data providers and external report utility, Excel utility. So these are utility files we required. And test data. Suppose if you are trying to automate user model, so we'll maintain the data in the user data.xls. Or if you're automating store module, then you store data.xls or pet data xls. So multiple Excel sheet we can maintain here. And we can generate the reports, test.ng reports or external reports by running our XML file or pom.xml file. We will able to generate the reports. So this is all development and execution. So once you have done this, then we will push the entire code into Git and GitHub repositories. And finally, we will run through Jenkins. This is the CI process again. So this is the entire process. And log4j, if you want, you can add it, but that is an optional because we have something called log all, right? So whenever you get some response, you can just print that message in the console window. Or if you still want to write a logs in the log file, you can just add one more dependency log4j, and you can write that statement in the test cases. So every statement we can log into the log file. And that also you can implement. That is an optional for REST assured automation. If it is a web application, because there are many flows are there, UI flows. So to debug where exactly it is got failed, logs will be very, very useful. But here it's not that much useful. But if you still want to create a logs, debug level logs, you can still have log4j dependency in the log pom.xml. We can create the log files. Okay. And this is a one type of framework. And some people or some companies, they also use something called properties file. So here we use something called routes, right? So here we will maintain all the URLs. Instead of this, some people will also try to use a separate property file they will use. There they will keep all the URLs. And it is almost the same, but only thing is here instead of routes, they will use something called properties file. And in this, they will maintain all the URLs or endpoints. So from the properties file, we will get all the URLs into endpoints and they will use it here. This is another way some people will do it. And I will show you both the approaches. First, let us focus on this without using property file, how we can achieve the whole thing. And once we design everything, then we can simply replace this routes into properties file. Okay. So this is a complete the workflow of framework. So what are the different components will be there, files, packages, and so on. So with this, we will start designing the framework. Okay. And this is a step-by-step process. And while practicing also, you have to do the same process. Okay. Don't jump here and then. So in whichever order I'm explaining the things, same order, you have to practice your own. Okay. So first of all, let us start from the first component called endpoints. First of all, we will create a project structure and then we will implement one by one, step by step. Okay. So minimize it and let's go to Eclipse now. So as a first step, what we have to do is we have to create a new Maven project. So always we will create a Maven project. Don't create a Java project. So instead of using this, I'm going to create a new project. Go to File, New, create a Maven project. Go to Other, select Maven project, and say Next. Here, select this option. Otherwise, it will show you different type of template. We can choose one template, or else we will create our own template. So select the first option, create a simple project, and say Next. So here we have to provide a few details, a group ID, artifact ID, so on. And basically group ID, artifact ID is basically your project name. So here you can say pet store automation, and same thing I'm giving here, and then click on the finish. You don't need to provide all other details, simply you can say finish. Okay, now it is created a new Maven project, pet store automation. So in this, we will get some default packages, and let us try to understand what exactly they are. So whenever you create a new Maven project, by default, you will get pom.xml. And in this, we will try to add all dependencies which are required for our project. And additionally, you will get 4 different packages here: SRC main Java, SRC main resources, SRC test Java, SRC test resources. So basically, when developers develop some code, right? So the development code, they'll keep inside SRC main Java. All main code will be part of SRC main Java. So while they test that code, developers point of view, if they want to test their code, they will write some unit test cases. So those test cases, they will keep inside SRC test Java. Okay, SRC main Java is for development code. SRC test Java is for testing code. Normally they will write unit test cases. So they put their unit test case in SRC test Java. Suppose while developing the code, main code, if they need any resources, means what, property files or XML files or any Excel file, anything, whatever other external files are required to development purpose, they will keep inside SRC main resources. Similarly, while developing the test cases, if we need any resources, we will keep inside SRC test resources. So our testing perspective, we will use only these 2 packages, SRC test Java, SRC test resources. These 2 are enough. And we don't need to go to SRC main or SRC main resources. Even if you delete these 2 packages, no problem. You can simply delete them, or even if you have them, we don't need to use them. So in SRC test Java, we will write all your test cases. And SRC test resources, we will maintain all the resources files which are required for our testing. Okay, remember this. Now, pom.xml, first we need to add required dependencies in the pom.xml. Okay, so let me write all the steps one by one. So here, okay, so step 1, we have to create Maven project. And then step 2, we have to update pom.xml with required dependencies. We need to update pom.xml with required dependencies. So what are the required dependencies are required? So I will give a list of dependencies, and accordingly we can get the dependency from the MVN repository, and then we will try to add them. So go to pom.xml, and I already have pom.xml. So I'll just copy all the dependencies. Same XML file I will share with you, so you guys can add them. So here, actually pom.xml is having 2 different type of entries. One is dependencies, the second one is plugins. Dependencies for downloading required jar files for your project, and plugins are there and to compile and executing your project. For that, we need to have some plugins. Okay, so we will add them plugins later. So first of all, let us try to add dependencies. Okay, so we need to add one tag like this, dependencies. opening tag and a closing tag. Right. So inside this, we will add required dependencies. I will provide you all the dependencies and you guys just add them into your Pom.xml file. Just a second. Okay. So these are the list of dependencies which we required for now. So later, if any dependency is required, we'll keep add all other dependencies. For now, these are the enough dependencies which we required. So this is for rest assured, and this is for JSON path because we need to validate the JSON also. So org JSON is also required, and test engine dependency required, and script Java APIs. This is also required for authentication purposes. If your APIs are having some auth1 and auth2 authentication, this is dependency we required. And JSON schema validation, and this is for Java Faker. If you want to generate some random data or fake data, we need this. And this is for extend report generation. So this is required because whenever you want to generate an extend report, there's a third-party report. So we have to get some jar file from it. So we need to add this dependency. And these two are for Apache POI. And if you are working with Excel sheet or Excel sheet data, we require these two dependencies. Okay. So for now, these dependencies are enough. And later, if you need more dependencies, we can still add them. So once you added those dependencies, then close this and then update your project. So whenever you do some changes in Pom.xml, always we try to update your project. So how to update? Right click on your project. And here you can just go to Maven and update project. And here select this option, force update. Sometimes if you don't select this option, it will not update properly. So select this option and then say okay. So once it is done, so your project is got updated. And if I just look at this Maven dependencies, you will get all the required jar files, right? So this is the first step. So we created a new Maven project, and then we have updated Pom.xml with required dependencies, right? Now, so now actual development will start. So the basic structure we have to create. So what are the different components we have in your project? Like we have endpoints, test cases, payloads, utilities, test data, reports. So many things are there. So we'll create different packages and we will create a different folder structure. So how the folder structure should be. So let me share a small folder structure. It should be like this. So this is your project name. And under SRC test Java, we will create a different packages like this. So API is a main package and sub package. API.endpoints. Here we will maintain all endpoints. So whatever I have shown in the picture, so these are all endpoints I will maintain in that package because these are all classes, different classes. And API.payload. So in this, we will maintain all the payloads like Pojo classes. And API.test. Inside, we will create all the test cases. And utilities, API.utilities. Here we will maintain Excel utilities, extend report utilities. All utilities means what? Reusable components. And suppose if you want to maintain some properties, then we will create something called routes.properties file. Name can be anything. So normally, if you want to specify the end URLs, you can use this file, routes.properties. That should be part of your resources. And apart from this, you have something called test.xml file. Later, we will create Pom.xml anyway, we are having. So user data, this is a test data file. And you can create a new folder, test data inside this also, you can keep it, but you can keep directly in the project, no problem. And reports folder, so we'll create one more folder called reports in which we'll maintain all the reports. This is the folder structure exactly we have to create a similar folder structure. So let's create now with the same folder structure. So now the step 3, create folder structure. This is the most important, the starting point of your framework. Create folder structure. Okay, so exactly the same folder structure we will try to create in our Eclipse. Okay, so by looking at this folder structure, we will try to create. And you guys also should do the same thing. And once you start practicing this, okay. Yeah. Second. Okay. So let's keep side by side like this, and then accordingly, we will try to create. So we have to mainly focus on the two packages, SRC test Java, SRC test resources. Okay. So go to SRC test Java. So inside this, I'm going to create a new package. So API.endpoints. I can directly write endpoints only, but we always try to have some standard, right? So API.endpoints. API is a main package. So inside this endpoints. So here we will get multiple classes later. So click on finish. So which is created an empty package. And then create another package, API.payload. API.payload. So here we will maintain all the Pojo classes. And then create one more package, API.test. So here we will maintain all the test cases in the API test. And then we create one more package, API.utilities. Inside this, we will maintain all the utilities file, API.utilities. Done. So now resources we will create later, root properties will create later, and test ng and also will create later, and user data also will create later. And what else we require? We need a folder called reports, and that should be project level. So select the project, right click and create a folder. Select the folder, and my folder name is what? Reports. Okay, folder name is what? Reports. And if you want to store the logs, so I can also add logs folder. And inside this, we will create all the logs. And we need to add log4j dependency also in the pom.xml. So later I will show you that. So we will generate the logs inside the folder, and reports will be part of reports. And pom.xml is anyway contains dependencies, plugins. Test.ng XML file we will create later. Once you created your test cases, we will run the test cases through test.ng. So that time we will create slowly. So the basic folder structure which we have created. So this is our folder structure. Okay. So SRC test Java. So we have endpoints, payload, test utilities. If you don't need these packages, you can just directly remove SRC main Java. You can just right click and you can just delete. And SRC main resources also you can directly delete. Okay. So now we have only the required packages. So this is the next step. So we created a Maven project. Then we have updated pom.xml, and then we have created a folder structure. So now we have to implement. These are the prerequisites actually. Okay, so these are the prerequisites. The basic stuff we required. And now we are going to develop. So we are starting the development, designing and development of your framework. So we'll do parallelly design and development. So according to your structure. So first we will focus more on endpoints. Okay. And once you design this, then we will go to the rest of the things. Payload is required, utility is required, data. And once you ready each and everything, then finally we will create a test case, because to design the test cases, we need all these components. So we don't directly jump and create the test cases. We need to create some other components which are required to design and develop the test cases. So first of all, let us start with the endpoints. So we will start with the endpoint package. Inside this, we have to create something called routes. Route is nothing but what? The URL. When you send an API request, where it should go. So that is basically described by the URL. So those URLs we need to create. Where we have to create in the routes class. Okay, in the routes class, we have to create them. So according to the framework, we will first create the routes. Okay. So how to create it? So go to endpoints, and here I'm going to create a new class. So my class name is what? Roots. Okay, roots, and click on the finish. So inside these roots, I will maintain only the URLs, right? So from where we will get? From the Swagger UI. From the Swagger UI, we have to capture all the URLs. So I'm writing all the URLs, what I'm using. Here, I'm trying to automate only user module. So later you can add more number of URLs. So from this Swagger, I have captured the URLs. Like for creating user, this is the URL I want to use. For get the user, this is the URL. Here username I will pass dynamically at the runtime, and put and delete. So these are the URLs currently we capture from the Swagger. So these URLs we have to maintain here. In the roots package, we are not going to implement anything. We are just maintaining the roots. We are just maintaining the URLs. How to maintain the URLs? We will maintain the main URL. What is the main URL here is? This is the main URL, right? So if I just look at the URLs, this is the actual domain, actual root. And here, these are the endpoint /v2 user. These are the endpoints actually, right? So this is a common in every URL. So till here, v2 is a common in every URL. You can just look at here, right? So I will call it as a base URL. I'll call it as a base URL, and rest of the part I call as an endpoint. Base URL and endpoint. Collectively, we can call as a URL, Uniform Resource Locator. So this part is called base URL. This part is called endpoint. Okay. Yeah. So here, in the pet store only, they have multiple modules. If I just go to here, this is Swagger Pet Store. This is a main project name itself is a pet store, and pet is one of the module, and user is another module, store is another module. Okay, that's the reason I'm giving that name. And later you also automate these things. Pet module and store module also should be automated as part of the same framework. And there is no different framework. Same framework, you are going to automate other modules also. I'm going to show you this particular model, user module. Okay. So the whole project name is Pet Store. So that's the reason they are giving Pet Store is a complete project name. All right. So now come back. So here, these are the different URLs. So now we need to understand here the difference means. So this is a base URL, which is common across all the requests. And at this point is called these are the endpoint /user /username /username. These are the endpoints. So this base URL is a common across multiple requests. So what I will do is I will create one variable here, base underscore URL equal to, I'll keep this till version number 2, v2. So this is a base URL. I'll keep in this variable base URL, and I'll make it as a public and also static string variable. Okay, so I'll make it as a public so that I can access everywhere in the project. And also I make it static so that I can access this variable directly by using a class name without using any object. And this is basically a string type. So I put this variable as a string. So this is the base URL I have defined. So now I want to create endpoints for user model. Currently, I'm working on user model. So I'll say for user model, I put some comment here, user model I'm using. User model. Yeah, user is also common, but that should be part of your endpoint actually. So that's the reason I'm not keeping that. But suppose tomorrow if you're using pet module or store module, so this also will be changing. But still this remains the same. Okay. So that's the reason I have not put this user as part of the base URL. So base URL means only till here, this is a base URL. And if you're working on user module, so then it will come user. Or suppose if you are working on pet module, then it will be pet. And if you are working on store module, then it will be store. So this also keeps changing based on your model. So I don't consider that as a base URL. That is also part of your endpoint. Okay. So now I'm going to design endpoints of roots of user module, especially for user module, whatever the roots are there, I'm going to specify here. Okay. So we will have a 4 different type of request here. I'm taking post request, get request, update, and delete request. For 4, I'm creating 4 different variables. All are public static string. So the first URL I'm creating public static string post URL. The post URL is what? What is the post URL here? Post. This is a complete post URL. This is a complete post URL. Right. So if I just look at this base URL already saved in one variable here. Right. So you don't need to write this base URL in every URL, in every request URL. So what we can do is you can just copy this variable and remove this part from here. Okay. And then concatenate. Okay. So like this, concatenate. So now what happens? The base URL variable, it will get this value followed by the endpoint. Now this is a base URL and this is the endpoint. Collectively, we can call it as a URL. So this is a post URL. So similarly, we have to create another URLs. So let me create another URLs. Okay, so public static string get URL. So base URL plus this is the endpoint. And again, this username is a path parameter. Okay, so later while writing the test cases, we will create this. Username is a path parameter. So we have to directly put in the curly brace. So these are the 3 different URLs. So one is post URL, get URL, update URL, delete URL. So these are the URLs which we are going to use for user module. Suppose tomorrow if you are adding test cases for store module or pet module, then what you will do, you will keep adding more. Let's say, for example, store module if you want to add. So you can put all store module URLs here in the same file. Don't create a separate file. And similarly, here you will create, here you will create store module URLs. Okay, and similarly, you will create pet module. So for pet module, you will create pet module URLs. Here, you will create pet module URLs. Okay, so this is the first file. We'll starting with this file, the first and most important. So this is a routes. So in this file, we will have only the URLs. Okay, so because the username is an endpoint, whichever user we created, the same user we have to pass, right? While getting the user details for updating the user, or delete the user. To perform these operations, we need username as an input. From where we will get the username as an input? First, we have to send a post request that will create a new user. And that username we are going to pass in another request. That's the reason we are creating this as a path parameter. Guys, understood? So this username is, we can't hard code this because we don't know which username will be there in the database. We have to create our own username and then we will pass that username in the rest of the request. First, we have to send a post request, which will create a new user. The same username we have to capture and send the rest of the URLs. Is a chaining process. Yes. Clear everyone so far? This is the first file which you have to create as part of the framework. Routes. Routes contains what? Only the URLs. We don't implement any methods, no implementation, nothing. Only URLs we will maintain in the routes class. These are called routes. So all store related module routes, pet module, whatever modules are there in your project, all the modules, URLs we will maintain in single file. That is called routes. The first file. Here I have added only user module. Later you keep adding more number of modules in the same file. Okay. Now, so the first part is completed. So here, step 4. So these are the prerequisite. Now we are designing and development. So step 4 is what? We have to create routes. We have to create routes file, routes.java. So what is the use of this file? What we will maintain here? which contains URLs. It contains a URLs. For that, we created roots.java. All right. So now we have to use these roots to implement different type of request. So what is the next step is what we have to create different endpoint classes. So currently we are working on user module. So we have to design user endpoints. We have just defined only roots here. By using those roots, we have to define the endpoints. So how to write this class, I will show you. Similarly, you guys also create another classes for store and pet. So user endpoints we have to write. So that's the next step. Step 5. Create user module. I'm creating the endpoints for user module. So I'm just saying user endpoints. But if you're creating endpoints for, don't think endpoint is nothing but the roots we have created. That is endpoint only. That's the terminology. But actually we are implementing the methods, endpoint methods to sending these requests. And we call them as endpoint classes. So create user endpoint.java file. And what it contains now, it contains CRUD methods implementation. What is CRUD? Anyone know about this? Methods implementation. Implementation. What is CRUD? CRUD. Create, retrieve, update, and delete. Okay, so this is the name which normally we use in the database operations, like creating the table, retrieving the data from the table, or updating and deleting the data. So the same thing is applicable for ABA also. Right. So in the user endpoint, what you will do is we will try to implement methods which will perform CRUD operations, like creating the user, retrieving the user, updating the user, deleting the user. So for these operations, we will actually implement methods in this user endpoint.java class. Okay, and we are not going to make this part of your test case. Test case is having only validations, nothing else. Okay, so now let us create user endpoint.java. Similarly, you have to create store endpoint.java, pet endpoint.java. So how many modules you have in your project? For all those modules, you have to create. So now I'm going to create this file, user endpoints.java. I'm going to create this file. Where you want to create this? Again, in the same package. So right click, new class, user endpoints, user endpoints. Okay, so now we'll see how we can implement this user endpoints. Okay, so user endpoints. So it is very simple. But in the user endpoints, we are going to use these roots also. These roots also we are going to use. These two are internally connected. Okay. So let me tell you how to implement this user endpoints class. So which is having only CRUD operations. Remember this. Okay. I'm also going to write something here. This is user endpoints.java file. So what it contains a which is created to perform. Why we created this? Which is created for perform CRUD operations. What was the create, update, and delete? Create, read, update, and delete. Delete requests to the user service, or you can say user API. So we created this class especially to perform these operations on the user model or user API. So how we can create this, how we can develop these methods. So first let us start with the create. How to create a method for create user. So I'll make every method as a public static. So we don't extend anything here. Okay. I'll show you, because every variable is a static we put here, right? So directly we can access these variables by using class name itself. So we no need to do any extension or nothing. So user endpoint. So don't compare with any other framework, guys. If you are comparing this with any other framework, you will get so many thoughts. So just forget about all other stuff. Just listen this with fresh mind. Okay, then you will understand something. So we don't compare with anything, and we don't club everything into one single unit. So every framework is having their own approach. Okay, so now let us try to implement user endpoints. So I'll try to implement the first one, create user. How to implement the create user. So for that, I'm writing one method. Every method I'm making as a static method so that I can access those methods directly by using a class name. So public static, and okay. So what I'll do is we will do one method like this. So my method name is what? Create user. My method name is create user. And these are not test methods. Remember this. Test methods should be part of only test case classes. We are not creating the test cases here. We are creating just only endpoints. And these endpoints methods we are calling from the test case later. So if I just look at the picture here, these endpoints we are going to call from the test cases. So only test methods are available only inside the test cases, but not here. Okay, remember. So now create user, I'm going to create. So what you will do is this particular method will take some payload. So we need to take some payload. Payload is nothing but what? User payload. To create a user data, we need some payload. So before that, what I will do is we will need to have some payload also. Okay, so we need to have one payload also. So that we need to implement. So for that, what I will do is directly I'm writing user and I say payload. I'm taking some parameter here. I'm taking some parameter, but actually this user payload still not developed. We will develop that. So this particular method is taking some payload. Payload is nothing but what? Request body. Because whenever you send a request, we need a body, right? So that body we will take as a payload. So user type of payload we will take. And here we will write a given prerequisite given, and also we need to import required packages. So let me try to import these packages. Okay, so these are the different packages which we have imported. So given and when, and here we don't have it then because we will return the response, and on top of response we do validations. So in the given, what do we need to do? We need to send a request. Before sending a request, we need to specify something called content type, accept, body, and so on. And these specification again you will get it from the Swagger document. So what type of data you are sending? So that is basically called content type. So here I'm specifying content type is I specified content type dot JSON I'm going to pass. And also it accepted JSON. So I'm passing one more header. So this is actually one header which we need to pass. And if you look at the Swagger document, you will know what we should pass. If I just go and create a user request, right? So they will mention clearly what exactly we have to pass. So for example, this is the body we are going to pass. And if you just click on try it out, like execute. Okay, so you will see here, this is actual request URL. And what else we need to pass along with this body? We have to pass two other things. These are all part of header actually. So -h is representing the header. Let me just maximize this. Okay, so this -h is part of the header actually. So this accept application / JSON, content type is also application.json. So these two things should be part of your request. We have to pass this along with the request. So that is the reason I mentioned here. So content type is content type.json, accept also the accept also content type, that is also JSON. So I'll say content type dot JSON. Two times we have to specify. Content type is accept, both are different. And now in the when section, we have to specify. And one more thing we forgot. Body also we have to send, right, along with the request. So dot body. And which body we have to send? This one. Whatever payload we captured as part of input, so that we have to pass. And now in the when, what do we need to, we have to exactly send the request. What kind of request you have to send? We have to send a post request. So dot post, and here which URL we have to pass? So we are getting only payload here, not URL. So now we need to get the post URL from routes class. In the routes class, what is a post URL? This is a post URL. So this particular variable we have to access here. So how to access this variable here? So how to access this variable here? So how to access this variable here? Do we need to create any object for routes? Do we need to create an object for the routes, or can we access directly by using a class name? Because this is a static variable, we can directly access through class name, right? So what we can do here is we can directly specify the class name routes dot post URL. That's it. And then put the semicolon so that we will get the response. So once you put the semicolon, this post will return some response. So here at the method level, what you will do, sorry, in the given level, here we have to put some variable. I'll create one variable called response. And the type of the variable is what? Response. Okay, so this is the implementation of method. So I can make this method also public static so that I can access this in everywhere else. I can make it as a public and static. And one more thing, once this is sending the response into this variable, I'm not doing any validations here. So I will do validations as part of the test case. So it will get the payload, sending the request, and returning the and storing the response in a variable. And finally, what I will do, I will return the response. Now, what is the return type here? Again, same return type is response. Okay, so this is the implementation of create user endpoint. This is the implementation. We are just having only prerequisite and also request. We are not having any validations here. So this particular method we will call from the test case by passing payload. And once we returning the response here, we will capture the response in the test case and then we'll do validation. Okay, so that is a process. So now you understood the link between the routes and user endpoints. What is the link here? Here we are referring the URL from the routes class. Okay, so still we have not developed this user payload. We are going to implement now. So this is how we need to first develop the create user. Yes, so this is a actually user Pojo class we have to create. That's the next step. We are going to do that. Okay, so this is a first endpoint. Now let us implement rest of them for reading, updating, and also deletion. So for reading, how we can use, we will create one more method here. I'll copy this same thing. And here instead of create user, I will say read user. And do we need any parameter here, guys? Do we need payload for reading user? So do we need any payload for reading user? No, because we are not passing any data along with the request. It is a get request. But what we need here, see, according to this URL, what we need, get URL is required some username, right? This is the parameter we required. So this parameter we will pass through the test case later. So, but here we are receiving that parameter, string username. So this username, we will get it from the test case later. So this read user is taking some username as a parameter and we have to send a request. So here in the given section, okay, so in the given, do we need to pass anything? Here, body we need, no content type not required, accept also not required. What we need to send here? As part of given, path parameter, this username is a path parameter, right? So how we can specify path parameter in the given? Path parameter dot path param. So path parameter name I'm giving as user name. This is a name of the parameter. So what is the value of the parameter? This is the one. So this is the value of the parameter. Value. So this is a path parameter name. This is a path parameter value. Whatever value I'm getting here into variable, same thing I'm assigning to the path parameter. Now, which URL we have to pass here? Roots dot get URL. Is it enough? Get URL is enough. Because the get URL is also contains a path parameter, right? So get URL is also contains the username path parameter here. So whatever parameter we define here, the same thing should be here, so that the value of this username will be automatically substituted in the place of username parameter. Again, I'm not repeating this because earlier we have discussed this many times, how to define the path parameter, how to refer the path parameter in the URL. So the reference also part of this URL. So here I don't need to pass anything. Just I am calling get URL method and returning the response. And what type of request it is? It is a get request. So I say get. Even get request also returning the response. So here I'm ending the semicolon here. That will be stored response in this variable. Now I'm returning the variable response variable. I'm returning the return type is again response. Right. So this is a implementation of read user method. Implementation is done. Now let us try to implement one more endpoint. Get request is done. So create user, read user. Then what else? Update user. We need to do update user. How to create an update user? So it is almost similar to create user. So I'm just copying this code directly. Let us try to update user. So for update user, what are the things we need? Update user. For updating user, what are all things we need? If I look at the URL, update user, username parameter we required. And what else we need? Because we are updating the data. Payload is also required. Because the user payload is also required. Because initially we will pass some name, email address, so and so. And if you want to update the details, again, we have to modify the data. And we need payload also. So this time we need two parameters. One is which user you want to update. That is represented by the user. Right? So that's the first parameter I'm defining. I say string username. And what is the second parameter? Second parameter should be payload. Payload is also required. Two parameters are required. Now content type is same. Content type.json except content type.json. These two are getting from the Swagger. So while sending the request, what is the content type they are sending? So that we need to specify. Content type.json, content type is both are JSON. And path parameter. So here username is a path parameter, right? So along with this body, what else we need to send? Path parameter also we need to send. So additionally, we need to add path param also. Path param. So parameter name is what? User name. And what is the value of the path parameter? This is the one. Done. So for update request, we need two parameters. Username is a path parameter, payload is a body. So path parameter and body also we have defined. So now here we have to send a put request. So I'll say put. And which URL we have to use? Instead of post URL, we have to get update URL. Update URL and put the semicolon and get the response in a variable and now return the response. So this is the implementation of update user endpoint. So now three we have completed. Create user, read user, and update user. So what exactly we are doing here? We are taking some input, doing the process, returning the response. We are not doing any validations here. The validations and passing these parameters should be part of your test cases. That is the next level. So currently we are in the second level. First level is what? Creation of the roots. Second level is what? Implementation of endpoints. Third level is what? Creating the test cases. Okay. Now let us create one more method, update user. Our last method is delete user. So how to delete? Delete user is almost similar to the get user. So I'm just copying this one. And this user payload we will implement later. So for now, I'm just defining the parameter. Now, delete user. I say delete user. And to deleting the user, what is the parameter we required? Only username. So I'm taking username as parameter. And that's a path parameter I define. And when get which request it is, delete request, right? So when delete, and what is the URL? Delete URL. So roots dot delete underscore URL. It's very simple. So we are sending this delete request, and once you get a response, we will again send the response into this variable. So this is a delete request. So with this, we have successfully implemented endpoints of 4 different type of request. So this class is created. So what we have achieved so far, this part is completed. This part is completed. But again, this is depends on what? Payload. We need this payload, right? So this payload is required. So now we need to create this user payload so that our all endpoints, especially post user, put request, post request, or depends on POJO. So now we will try to create a POJO class for user. So go back to Eclipse and close all these things. So where we have to create a POJO classes, we have to create a POJO classes under payload. So here I'm going to create a new class called as user. And tomorrow, if you're automating pet, so you have to create a pet POJO class, store POJO class, similarly user POJO class. So user and say finish. Okay. So now here, let us try to implement user POJO class. So how to implement user POJO class? POJO class. What is POJO class? Can anyone tell me the full form of POJO? POJO. User is a POJO class. Please respond. Plain old Java object. Yeah, these are the interview questions, guys. And what is JSON? JSON. What is the full form of JSON? Full form of JSON. JSON. JavaScript object notation. Okay, JavaScript object notation. So you have to remember this. Okay, so let's go to the let's create a user payload. So for that, first of all, we have to know what are the variables are there in the user payload, right? So we have ID, username, first name, last name, email, password, phone number, and user status. So these are the variables, right? Let's create some variables now, and we will create setters and getters automatically. So first of all, we will create variables, right? So these are the variables: integer ID, username, first name, last name. All these variables are string. Status code, and by default, I'm making as a 0. Okay, because they have also mentioned 0 as a default value, so I'm making as a 0. Okay, fine. So these are the variables. So for each variable, we have to create one getter method, one setter method, right? So one is for assigning the data into the variable, other method is for retrieving the data from the variable. So how to create setters and getters for these variables? Just select them. You don't need to write manually. You can just select them. Go to source. And here you can see one option called getter, generate getters and setters. Just click on this option. And it will show you all the variables, whatever you need. You can select all variables and say, click on generate. So this will automatically generated all setters and getters, and you can again keep those variables at the beginning of the method. You can keep anywhere, no problem. So this is our POJO class. This is your POJO class. This is how we need to design. Just every method, suppose let's say ID. For the ID, we have a get ID and set ID. Set ID will take one parameter and assign that value into the ID. And get ID will return the value. Get username will return the username. Set username will set the username value. So these are again very basic Java concepts. So which is created, we created one POJO class for user model. Similarly, if you're automating pet or store modules, you have to create a separate Pojo classes, just like this, similarly. Okay. So now this Pojo class, we have to refer, go to endpoints, go back to the endpoints. And here, so this user, we have to import from which class? API.payload, because we already created user.java now. So we will import this class. Whenever you're referring the class, we have to import required package. So what is the package name? API.payload. This package we have to import. Done. So now save the file. So everything is done. So with this, we successfully created endpoints and payload, especially for user model. For user model, we created one Pojo class. For the same user model, we created endpoints. Now, what is the next thing we need to do? What's the next thing? We have to create a user test cases. We have to create a user test case. That's the next level. Okay. Now let us start creating the test cases. Okay. So far what we have done, we have created roots, and then we have created one Pojo class, and then we have implemented user endpoints. So this part is completed. So the next part is what? We have to create a user test. And this is very simple because almost 80% of the job we have done here itself. User endpoints we have done. So in the user test case, we have to just call the endpoints method. So these are the points, endpoint method we have created, right? So these are the methods we have to just call from the actual test case. That's the only thing we have to do. Now let us try to implement the test cases. It's very small thing, and we will do that. So let's go and create a test case. So where we have to create the test? Under API.test. So right click here, new class, and here I will say user tests. User test. So in this, we will create test cases only for user module. And suppose tomorrow, if you're automating pet or store module, we can create another test. Okay. So before creating this user test, we have to again create how many tests we required here? 4 tests: post user, get user, update user, and delete user. Only 4 things are required. Okay. So, but before this, we have to send a post request. For that, we need a data. So the data we have to prepare. Okay, that data we have to prepare. So for that, we will create one method here, before test method. I'll create one simple method. I'll say public void, or you can simply say setup or setup data. So I will execute this before class. We have annotation in the test ng, right? Same annotation I'm using. When I say before class, what happens? This particular method will execute before starting all the test methods. So in this method, what I will do is I will generate the data by using Faker library. I will generate the data, and that particular data, I will pass it to the Pojo class so that the data will be ready, and that data we will pass along with the post request. Okay. So now in the setup data, we are going to use Faker library. So I'm creating one global variable called Faker. So I say Faker, and I say Faker. And we already discussed about in the previous classes, right? So the same thing I'm referring. So we have to import this Faker library from com.github.java fake. And by using this, we will able to create the data. And parallelly, whenever the data is created, what type of data we create? ID, username, first name, last name, email address, password, cell phone number. So these are the fields we are going to generate using Faker. And once we generated, the parallelly we have to pass the data in these methods: set ID, set username, set first name. So these are the methods we have to call by passing the data. So if I just go here, and we need to use Faker variable we created, object we have to create here, Faker equal to new Faker. Okay, now we have to pass the data to the payload, right? Pojo class payload. So for that also we need to create. So here for user Pojo class, I will create a variable. I say user payload. And for this user, we need to also import this user from api.payload. And here we have to create object. We have to create user payload equal to new user. So that whatever data we prepared by using these fakers, the same data we have to pass to this Pojo class. Okay. So now both should be done parallelly. So I'll show you first ID. Let us take an ID. So I want to assign the ID value, for example. So what we need to do from the user payload, we have to call one method. What is that method we have to call to set the ID? Set user, set ID, right? Set ID. So now here we have to pass the ID. So this ID we have to generate using the faker library. So how to generate the ID here? Faker dot. There is a method called ID number. And dot, you can leave this ID number, but it will generate same number most of the time. So I can simply say hash code. I call this method so that it randomly generates some ID number. See this here, I'm generating the ID and passing the same ID into the payload by calling set ID method. Similarly, same thing we have to repeat for username, first name, last name, email address, and so on. So what I'll do is I will just have all the stuff here. See this payload.uset username. From the faker, I'm creating the name, username, and passing it. First name I'm generating and passing it. Last name, set email address, password, cell phone, everything I'm generating. At the same time, I'm passing to the Pojo class. So once you pass the Pojo class, what happens? So this user payload is having data now. This is having data. Now this user payload data we have to pass in every test, in the post request, in the put request. Every time we have to pass this. So this is the first thing we have to do, which will generate the data. And now this data we have to pass as part of the post request. Now observe this, how I'm going to write the post request test case. And this is a very important. So here, test post user. Okay, this is my test name I'm writing. Test post user. Test post user. And this is making as a public and void because I'm not returning anything. And this is the test method. This is the test method. Also, I'm giving some priority to this. Priority equal to 1. Okay, now import this test annotation. So now we are going to implement this test post user. So what we need to do now? So which endpoint we have to call? So we have endpoint. Roots are not required because roots we already used, and user is also not required now. So now we have only these two connections. Only these two we need to connect. So now this particular create user, we have to call from the test post user. How to call? Can we call this directly by using class name or not? Because it's a static method, we can directly call. Right or wrong? So can we call this method by using class name directly? Yes or no? Yes. So when you call this user endpoints, directly I'm calling user endpoints dot create user, and whatever payload we generated here, the same payload I'm passing here. Done. So this will return some response for us, right? Create user method will return what? Response. So that response we have to store in a variable response. What is the type of this variable? Is response type. Now import this response from io.rest assured. By mistake, if you import this from another package, it will run into issues. So please carefully import this. So now we got the response. So once you get a response, you can simply do the validations. First of all, I want to log information. Simply say response dot, simply say then dot log all. So then you can use it here, because once you get a response, on top of response, we can use then dot log dot all. It will log all the response. This is one thing. And what else we can put here? All validations like status code, data, everything we will able to validate. Suppose I want to validate status code. We can put one assertion. Assert dot assert equals, and what is the response status code? How to get the status code from this response? Response dot get a status code. This will give you a status code. What is your expectation? 200 is my expectation. So one validation. Now, similarly, the data also we can validate, and status line, everything we will able to validate by using this response. So now we can see how simple it is to create a test case, because almost 80% of the job is done in the endpoints itself. Here itself we have done. Only thing what we are doing in the test case, we are just calling the test, we are just calling the endpoint by passing the required input. So this payload will go here and perform the rest of the things. It will return the response. By taking the response, we can do the other validations. Okay. So this is how we can create a test case. Similarly, we can also create other test cases for get request, update request, and also delete request. So this is the process, guys. This is the process. So first we have created endpoints. In the roots, we mentioned all the roots. And then we created multiple endpoints, and required Pojo class also we created. And then we have implemented the user test. In the next session, we will see rest of the test. Currently, I've just shown you how to create the test case, how simple it is, because we already done everything in the endpoint. So here we just need to call the endpoint and get the response and do whatever validations you wanted to do here. Okay, so this is a process of writing the test. So in the tomorrow session, we will continue again, create few more number of tests, and also we'll see where exactly we use these utilities, test data, data-driven test case, so many things still there. So we will continue in the next session. Okay. So what is your job today is you have to do the same thing as it is. Whatever I have done today, first create your folder structure, create your new Maven project, create your folder structure, and try to create your roots and endpoints, complete this part, and also create your Pojo class and try to write one test case. Tomorrow, we will write few more test cases, and then we will try to execute and see the rest of the things. Okay. So we'll stop today. We'll continue tomorrow.